Talk about Matthew DeSorga. So he was the first defense witness in the Karen Read case. And I mean, perfect hair, am I right? And that delightful little Windsor knot, I mean, flawless. Anyway, the whole purpose of having this guy, he's like the major data guy. And the whole purpose was to dispute or refute or trash, however you want to say it, the work of Burgess and Welcher. Now, there was a lot of technical stuff that I am not quite sure I entirely understand, but I'm going to do my best here. So we've been talking about trigger events, like there's trigger events within the key cycles. And mind you, the trigger events don't seem to be captured at an exact time. You can't say at 10 a.m. and 32 seconds, this person slammed on the brakes. That's not how it works. But what happens is there's a trigger event, which is an anomaly. It's a slamming of the brakes. It's a yank of the steering wheel. It's something different other than just kind of that forward motion driving. And when a trigger event happens, the computer knows, record this, right? So it's basically captures, and it's recording data all the time. But what it does is it then provides detail of the data of the 5 seconds before and the 5 seconds after. So there's a 10-second window. That's what we've been talking all along. Now, what Burgess and Welcher were trying to do is they were trying to line up like John's cell phone data and the Apple Health data. And they were trying to make everything fit into any of these like 10-second windows of these two triggers. So 1162 and 1162.2. And they were trying to kind of get everything to kind of fit into these little windows. And they were sort of using that 5 second before and 5 second after as a little bit of a cushion. And DeSorga is like, no, not exactly. Let's see if I can wrap my brain around this. The trigger event would be something like a woman slaps her husband in the face. The minute that happens, that's the event. That is the trigger event. Yes, of course, it is helpful to know what happened the 5 seconds before, because he probably said something to deserve it. Am I right, ladies? I mean, he probably did. But then there's the 5 seconds after, which would tell us how he reacted. He shocked? Was he laughing? Did he hit her back? Like, we should know that. So Dr. Welcher and Dr. Burgess are like, let's kind of package it. Like, it's the entire incident. And DeSorga is saying, well, in truth, the slap is the incident. I understand why we want to talk the 5 seconds before and the 5 seconds after. I understand how that is valuable. But we don't get to then try to match up cell phone data within those 10 seconds. The cell phone data should match exactly what the trigger event. So, for example, if the trigger event is the car hitting John, then every single bit of the phone data and the health data should match to that exact moment. It shouldn't be like, well, you know, it was a reversing event and sometime within this 10 seconds, John was hit. Like, you don't get to do it that way. Then there were these kind of plus or minus 3 second things. So essentially what they're saying is they look at the car infotainment system and they look at John's cell phone and Apple data, right? And they're trying to see if they can make either of those things align with the actual trigger event, or at least fall in those 10 seconds. So for example, in one situation, they might say, okay, here's the trigger event. And here is the 5 seconds before, and here's the 5 seconds after. But John's phone is 3 seconds behind the infotainment system data. So it shows the trigger event happening here, and it does the 5 seconds before and 5 seconds after. But because John's phone is on a different time, we need to know what John is doing 2 seconds before, because he's 3 seconds behind, 2 seconds before, and 8 seconds after. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to make room for these windows where we say, well, that's weird because John was hit, but then he was walking 80 more feet. Right? They're trying to widen the window so they can explain how to do it. Well, you know, it's not a perfect calculation. Now, there's absolutely nothing wrong with having data that shows that this clock says this time and this clock says this time, and so you need to adjust for that. Totally fair. But I believe what Matthew DeSorga was saying was that throughout their presentations, that time shifts. So if you said John is always 3 seconds later, and you apply that to every single slide, then it makes sense. But in some cases, they're saying, well, John's phone is 3 seconds later because it makes sense in that moment to claim that John's phone is 3 seconds later because it matches that event. Then later on, they might say, oh, well, in this instance, John's phone was 3 seconds ahead. No, it doesn't shift. So what de Sorga was basically trying to do, it sounds like to me, maybe I didn't get it, but this is what it sounds like to me, is that all he's saying is, shouldn't you use the same 3 seconds all the way through? Like, it should never be 3 seconds ahead, 2 seconds behind, 3 seconds ahead, 4 seconds behind. It should never be like that. It should be one mathematical formula all the way through. To make it easy, think about it this way. If someone's describing a person, if someone's saying, this person right here weighs 10 pounds, and then in the next paragraph, they say they weigh 160 ounces. And then in the next paragraph, they say they weigh 4,500 grams. And in the next paragraph, they say 4.5 kilograms. What de Sorga is trying to do is be like, let's just figure out one measurement and stick with it. Let's go pounds the whole way through. And then because he wasn't sure if everybody wanted to use pounds, essentially, he was like, okay, so here's all the calculations in pounds. Here's all the calculations in ounces. Here's all the calculations if you do kilograms. And here's all the calculations if you do grams. That's basically what he did, was he just cleaned up the data so there was one common theme running through all of it. At least I think that's what he was doing. I could just be making all this shit up. But anyway, and that I think is what the problem was, is that's all he was saying, was the data wasn't necessarily incorrect. It just was inconsistent how they calculated what they were seeing. And it was inaccurate how they were presenting it, because they presented it in a different way each time. And regardless of how you calculate it, the trigger event is still the trigger event. So what Hank Brennan was trying to say is that he feels the prosecution proved there was a reverse action. He cannot say that there was a trigger, like the exact trigger event where the car came in contact with a person. All he knows is there was a reversing event, and there was 5 seconds forward, 5 seconds after. It was in this ballpark. And no matter how they futz the numbers, they still can't prove that there was a vehicle and person contact. A car being in reverse is not a crime. But cross-examination was testy. And it's because Hank Brennan is usually a defense attorney. And so we spent the entire first half of the trial listening to Hank constantly try to defend the witnesses. Jen McCabe didn't do this. Carrie Roberts didn't lie. This person didn't do this. This person didn't do this. He spends all of his time defending the actions of his witnesses instead of trying to prove Karen guilty. Now on cross-examination, and he tried a little bit, he kept saying to de Sorga, where's your data? And he's like, I used your data. And he's like, but you didn't do anything on your own. Like, how do you know it's wrong? And he's like, well, I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying I interpreted it different. But on whose data? Your guy's data. So if it's wrong, it's because your guy did it wrong. I think he's mad that de Sorga didn't bring any other data so that he could trash his data. Basically, what was happening is that this was all his guy's data. And so trashing it doesn't work. So he spent all of his cross-examination time going, don't you think Shannon Burgess is a genius? Like, he was able to come up with this new way of doing things. And did you hear Welcher? Like, have you not connected the dots? Welch, the guy invented grape jelly. Don't you think he's a fucking genius? And he's going to put Lexus into outer space. And de Sorga's like, no. But Hank is so, like, he's in such defense mode that he's just constantly trying to defend the people he puts up. And he's always just fighting his own case. There was nothing about his cross-examination that made Karen look bad.